All right, it is now 7 o'clock, and we will get this party started. Good evening, and welcome to this March 4th meeting of the Somerville School Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2024, this meeting of the School Committee will be conducted via hybrid participation. We will post an audio recording, audio-video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and local cable access government channels. Will you call the roll, Superintendent?
Yes, I will. Ms. Barish?
Present.
Mayor Ballantyne?
Present.
President Owen Campen?
Here.
Mr. Green? Mr. Bitton?
Here.
Ms. Bitton?
Present.
Dr. Ackman?
Here.
Dr. Phillips?
Here.
Ms. Krebsen?
Here.
We have quorum.
We will now introduce our translators. Spanish, if you could unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening, everyone. This is your Spanish interpreter, Tracy Pichardo. Hola, buenas noches. Este es el intérprete simultáneamente de español, Tracy Pichardo. Thank you.
Thank you. And Portuguese?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sue Di Carne, and I am the Portuguese interpreter. Boa noite a todos. Meu nome é Sue Di Carne, and I am eu sou a intérprete de português.
And Haitian Creole?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Angie Supri. I'm the Haitian interpreter for tonight. Bonsoir tout le monde. Mon nom c'est Angie Supri. Moi, c'est interprète pour nous pour assoir. Merci.
Thank you. We will now have a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. We will now hear from our student reps who are joining us via Zoom. If you'd like to unmute yourselves.
Hello, I am Marcus Odelin, a senior at Somerville High School, and I would like to begin by sharing about how spring sports registration is now open and preseason is soon to commence, with sports like volleyball and track already starting some training. As well, last week we met with administrators to briefly discuss the concerns that were brought up by students with regards to the bathroom monitoring and began brainstorming some ideas to encourage school safety, such as possible QR codes to report bathroom misuse. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Portillo, and I'm also a senior at SHS, and I wanted to briefly mention that this week there will be MCAS retakes for students, with ELA MCAS retakes taking place on March 4th and 6th, whereas Math MCAS retakes will be taking place on March 7th and 8th. Additionally, I wanted to briefly add on to what Marcus touched upon previously. As we met with admin, we also brainstormed possible new ideas for the structure of seniors class day event, such as the addition of highlighting some student achievements in sports, clubs, arts, etc. Lastly, I wanted to honor the National Honor Society for successfully fundraising for their 200 hygiene kits catered for those in need. Thank you.
Thank you for those reports. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, thank you again for joining us this evening. That brings us to approval of minutes, which we are going to table till our next meeting, which brings us to public comment. We have one person, Sarah Campbell. If you want to come up, the podium is yours. Before you start, I will read our instructions. Welcome and thank you to those who have signed up for public comment. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to present their material. However, the chair may limit comments to 2 minutes based on the number of individuals signed up to speak. Speakers should begin their comments by stating their name and address, or, in the case of district employees, their role within the district. The chair of the meeting, after a warning, reserves the right to terminate speech which is not constitutionally protected because it constitutes true threats that are likely to provoke a violent reaction and cause a breach of the peace, or incitement to imminent lawless conduct, or which contains obscenities. Public comment is not a discussion, debate, or dialogue between the public and the committee. Members of the committee will not reply to public comment in the course of the meeting, though individual members may follow up and items from public comment may be taken up in future meetings. The school committee will not hear personal complaints of school personnel nor against any member of the school community in public session. Individuals may address topics on the agenda or items within the school committee's scope of responsibility, such as the district budget, goals and policies, or role of the superintendent. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing for inclusion in the public record. And with that, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Sarah Campbell. I live on Trull Street, and I have a 4th grader and a 1st grader at the Brown School. Before our oldest started at Brown, we asked about the 5th to 6th grade transition. We were told that the kids typically ended up at Kennedy or West due to geography. A Brown parent told us that her daughter had gone through this process, and she didn't get her first choice and was offered a spot at the other of the 2 schools and told about a wait list. But then her daughter realized that a bunch of her friends were going to the same school, and they took her off the wait list and are happy with where she was. They made it work. This is what it's like to be a Brown School parent. I have many examples where at the Brown School we make do, we compromise. Today I'm asking you, Dr. Carmona, to please compromise, because this year's 5th grade enrollment at these schools is below the recent historical average of 120 students at Brown, Kennedy, and West. There are 102 5th graders between Brown, Kennedy, and West, according to DESI. Since we moved to 5th grade transition in 2017, 7 years ago, 6 of those years have had 102 or more 5th graders at these schools. Last year was the only year where enrollment was lower. This is an issue because you've decided to limit the 5th grade class size to 23 kids per class at Kennedy and West. If you use the full contractually available amount of 26 kids in a class, all of the current 5th grade students at the Brown can be served by these 2 schools. The given reason for the smaller class size is the social emotional health of the kids coming out of the pandemic. This prioritizes the social emotional health of students at Kennedy and West over those at the Brown, who would be better served by moving into 6th grade together. This rings especially true when we recall that the Brown students were some of the last in the city to return to in-class instruction. During COVID, the Brown students initially went back to trailers because the city wouldn't invest in their building. Like much of Somerville, the Brown community made it work. They compromised. Now, Dr. Carmona, we ask you to compromise. We're having this discussion not because of a change in the population of 5th graders, but because of a change in the superintendent's decision-making. What you call reactive, I call responsive to the needs of Brown families. But for those 10 kids who will be excluded by your decision and sent to different schools, it will have a very high impact. If you compromise so they can go to a school where they know their peers, it's a very meaningful difference, much more so than the impact of an additional 3 kids in a classroom. Use the full class size of 26 students at Kennedy and West, and consider bubble classrooms for future years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. That brings us to the report of the superintendent. Dr. Carmona.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Just wanted to thank Marcus and Emily who joined us this time around. It's great to hear student voices in our process. So thank you, Marcus and Emily, for joining. So today I'm thrilled to have 3 of our leaders tonight to join us. We have Principal Mace Diaz, Principal Pelletier, and Mr. Hachi, the Assistant Principal and Director of CTE from the high school. So before we give the floor to them, I wanted to connect the dots from the conversation that we had last week. It's hard to believe it's a week ago. On Monday, we were here talking about our data plan entry and some of the ways in which we are gathering some preliminary evidence on the needs and the strengths of our community. We also have Principal Caravallo, who was here sharing the data and giving us an idea of how are we going to maximize our resources to make sure that our instruction is centered on students and also focuses on equitable access to high-quality instruction and programs. So today we'll have some of the same, and I'm thrilled to be able to pass the baton to our principals and directors. Before I do that also, I just wanted to highlight the fact that we're in the middle of the 25 budget process, fiscal year 25 budget process, and one of the things that we do regularly is to try to maximize our inputs as well as our resources. And what we do in that process to the Budget Collaborative is that we do the same. We engage on looking at the strengths of our programs, looking at the needs, and then make the best decisions based on that data. So today is a continuation of that work. But all this is in service of making sure that our students, our curriculum, our programs are student-centered, and that we provide equitable access to high-quality instruction and programs. And Mr. Hachi will talk about some of those high-quality programs. So I am actually going to have him start tonight with an example of a great collaboration with the community partner. So with no further ado, Mr. Hachi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Carmona. So it's my pleasure to talk a little bit today about some of the partnerships that we have. And we received an email middle of January from the Zeno Group asking if we were interested in partner with the Boston Bruins and Bosch Tools. So if you know anything about me, I love tools and I love sports. So it was a win-win for me. So I was very excited about that. And so I said, what does this mean for us, and what does it mean for our students, and how can we service Bosch and the Boston Bruins was my ultimate question. So Bosch will donate about $3,000 to $4,000 worth of tools to Somerville Carpentry Program, and they will provide some training to the staff and students with these tools. So they've already come in, donated some tools, and there are several more on the way. And so what the Bruins will be doing, Bruins will be providing game-used and practice-used sticks for our students to build 1 or 2 pieces of furniture to get raffled off by the Bruins Foundation. You can go to the next slide, Erica. So my number one question was, why Somerville? So the Bosch Power Tools is passionate about supporting hard-working communities and the next generation of skilled trade workers, looking to engage with a strong local program that set a track to the trades within the Boston community. Bosch was thrilled to team up with Somerville High School. Somerville High School's carpentry program's commitment to fostering students' trade-focused skill set stood out and very much in line with their values. So that was their answer to why Somerville. So I always ask, okay, why are we looking to partner and how we can help you? So of course my answer was yes to the Bosch and yes to the Boston Bruins. You can go to the next slide. And so we called in and we had a meeting with Bosch and the Bruins. So this is a planning meeting with our students, with Blades, and with Bob Sweeney. You can go to the next slide. So as you can see, the team, the Bosch brought in several representatives, and the Boston Bruins Foundation brought in several representatives to meet with the students and come up with a plan of how we're going to execute this. And, you know, you want to talk about a great community partnership. Like this is, you know, this is a feather in anyone's cap, and the students were so excited to see, and it's so funny because I guess Blades is a local person, and Blades was unbelievable to us students. We had about 20 minutes of pause time while we're waiting for others to show up, and he was just dancing with the kids, everything, so he was awesome. And it was, as you can see, the students are looking at the sticks. Several of those sticks they're all broken, but several of them are signed. So we're working on getting some more sticks, maybe some goalie sticks that are signed. Maybe we're looking at Adirondack chairs with the goalie sticks as the armrest. So you can go to the next slide. So I found out the night before they were coming that Bob Sweeney was going to be coming to the school. So I said, well, I can't have a Boston Bruins player in the building and not have our hockey team involved. So I'm looking up the email and I'm saying to my wife, okay, it's like 8 o'clock at night. Do I call the principal? What do I do here? So I called Stan and I said, Stan, can I get the hockey team together? He goes, no problem, I'll make it happen. So he gets the hockey team together and I get Alicia on the phone, and so we were able to put that together. And so if you don't know, Bob Sweeney was a former hockey Bruins player, and he was just so great. And I emailed immediately to the Boston Bruins to say, hey, is he willing to meet with our team? And of course he was, and I was hoping it wasn't too much to ask. So, what a great partnership. The kids were so excited. The staff were excited. I made the announcement in the morning that Bob Sweeney and the team and Bosch team will be here at Blades, and so like all staff are like around the corner looking. So it was great to see, and the kids to see Blades walk through the hallway. Kids are just looking like, did I just see that walk through the hallway? So I was very excited. You can go to the next slide. So let the creativity begin. So we're looking at possibly the back of an Adirondack chair with some of the hockey sticks. And so the students have already started creating an Adirondack chair. And so it looks like we'll be able, with the sticks we have now, we'll be able to make one Adirondack chair, a small table, and then maybe another little piece of furniture. So we're very excited about that. You can go to the next slide. So as you can see, the students continue, and so then the Boston Bruins, maybe a week and a half ago, they sent this video out and said, hey, what do you guys think? And we'll let me know how you feel about this video. No volume, Erica. Now they'll start brainstorming, and now they'll start, I would imagine their creative juices are going to start flowing. It's only a minute long, Erica. I don't know if you want to restart it. Thank you.
Today's a partnership with Bosch, the Bruins, and Somerville High School. Students in the woodworking shop. A bunch of hockey sticks were delivered. They're going to build furniture, and they're going to send to an auction and help the schools out.
What the students will now, they'll start brainstorming, and now they'll start. We're hoping to have something done within the next month.
Now we're going to do something creative with sticks. I love it. It's going to involve 3D sticks, circular basics, and circular bottom top. Now, units off the cross. Because they're not really made out of wood and made of different materials, it's going to be a bit difficult for us with the saws and our sanders. But since
Yeah, so that video will be up on the website, and I know Jackie and her team will put it out to social media so you can all see it. But what a great opportunity for our students. So we're looking at probably in the next month or so, we'll unveil the pieces of furniture, and then it'll go to the Bruins Foundation, and they'll raffle it off for the Somerville CTE. So we're very excited about that, and we're hoping, Bob Sweeney was talking pretty good game, so hopefully we get some good publicity for it. So we're very excited about that. We also, I know Dr. Carmona did want me to talk a little bit about a couple other, community relationships we have going. Right now, we're working with Scale, and we're going to be applying for a workforce competitive grant, hopefully in the next month or so with Scale. And we're hoping to bring some night school to Somerville High School. So I know we're all very excited about that. And so, Jocelyn's been great in Scale, and so we're looking at bringing some night school, and maybe looking at a couple different grants, like the CTI grant, like a planning grant for maybe a construction program at night. So we do have a lot of things going on, and as you know, we have, our industry partners on the advisory boards, and so we'll be tapping into them for some more community things going on. And we're looking forward to really bringing this full circle throughout the community.
Thank you so much. It's always exciting to hear about the exciting things happening. Are there questions or comments? Dr. Ackman.
Thank you, through the chair. First off, thank you for sharing this. This is really exciting. I'm sure you have very strong and established relationships, but I know the High School of Science and Technology in Springfield is a school that does a lot with CTE and the night program, and I have a strong relationship with the principal there. As you're building it out, if you want to be connected with someone, because they've just built it out over the past few years themselves, so I'm happy to connect you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or comments? Since we have you here, I just want to make all of my colleagues aware that we had several students place in the Skills USA regional, if you want to just...
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we had our Skills USA competition. So there's local competition. So there was 14. We had 92 students sign up, 86 tested, and so we had 14 place, and that are moving on to the state level. So we'll be making that announcement within the next week or so with all the students' names and places and everything. So now they'll go at the end of April, beginning of May. They'll go compete in Marlboro overnight, 2 nights, and what a great opportunity. And that's the, once again, we hit another level. That's the most students we ever had competing in Skills USA. So, it's all about bringing it full circle. We see kids that haven't stayed overnight somewhere, so it's great to see, and the kids are really enjoying it, and the staff are really embracing, Skills USA and a lot of the other things that we're doing for the students. So it's very exciting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we can go to our next presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.
So Principal Mays Diaz from the East is next.
We're ready. Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the East Somerville Community School Improvement Plan. Next slide. I would like to start with our mission and vision statement. These 2 statements are new to our school. They were developed last year in collaboration with our staff. The mission statement is centered in providing quality education for all of our students. Next slide. And the vision statement is centered in fostering the feeling of belonging among our students. Next slide, please. We are a complex school that takes pride in our diversity. All our classes are SCI classes and have students with disabilities in them. Our student population is the 2nd largest of our district, and we have 754 students, and we currently have the most MLE students also in our building at 305, which makes 40% of our student population. Next slide, please. Today we have 3 focus areas. We have the focus area of equity, academics, and SEL. We're going to start with the focus area of equity, which is centered in the performance of our long-term Ls. As you can see, the exit criteria of average overall score is 4.2, but our LTELs are average and exit criteria is 3.2. Next slide, please. Our L services provided to our MLE students decreases as they progress from elementary to middle school due to the increased number of Ls, but our staffing has remained the same. Next slide, please. As a result, the progression of the percent of long-term Ls has increased as they move from elementary to middle school. That is the green bars that you see in the graph. Next slide, please. Our goal for our focus area of equity is that by June of 2025, 80% of the long-term Ls will increase the proficiency level. There's 3 goals in here that we're going to use to achieve this. First, we're going to have our SEL specialists use iReady reading data to create strategic groupings. We will use the June data to start our first groupings in September, and then after that, we'll use the 3 iReady reading diagnostics to then create 3 different groupings throughout the school year. In addition, we're going to continue to use grade level meetings as a focus for writing for our students, and then specifically creating rubrics and writing samples that push their student thinking. These meetings will happen during at least once a month. We will have about 10 meetings a year. And last, we're going to have to still continue to do test preparation, as Access is a complex test as it has 4 domains. Next slide, please. We're now going to focus on the academics. This one is particularly complex. We're going to talk about MCAS for ELA, MCAS for math, and also we're going to use our ARC data, which is how we gauge success in our UNIDOS program. For the focus area of academics for ELA, I would like to point out that 1.2% of MLE students have met and exceeds criteria during the ELA from last year. And it's important to note that no students with MLEs have scored the exceeding expectations in an ELA MCAS. Next slide, please. Similarly, 2.7% of our students with disabilities have received the score of meeting and exceeding on MCAS, with 0% of students receiving exceeding expectations. Next slide, please. Now we're discussing the math data. 1.8% of MLE students have received the meets or exceeds category on MCAS, and as well 0% of our MLE students have received this exceeding category on MCAS. Next slide, please. Similarly, for our special ed students, 2.7% of special ed students have received the meetings or exceeding category, with 0% of them in the exceeding category. Next slide, please. When looking at the possible root causes, it's a little bit complex. ESL services for our MLE students decreases as they progress from elementary school to middle school. These services in elementary school, as you can see, at 100%, which means they receive services 5 days a week. As they progress to middle school, those services decreases to 2 to 3 days a week only. Next slide, please. When discussing the root causes for special ed students not receiving the meeting or exceeding category, you can see here that we have our 4.8 resource room teachers servicing 800 students in our school. The services here are almost at the cap of 20. Next slide, please. As a result, some of our resource room teachers have missing minutes of instructional time due to meetings and other student services. Next slide, please. The focus area of academics for ARC. So ARC is the American Reading Company. It is the company that provides the curriculum for the UNIDOS program. This program is, we're on the 3rd year of implementation of ARC, and we have 2 assessments in English and Spanish to assess the progress of our student data. We have ENIL and we have IRLA. So the ENIL is the Spanish assessment, and IRLA is the English assessment. Here, as you can notice, students are progressing in their learning and slightly do better in slightly higher percentages of meeting their progress in the English exam. Next slide, please. The potential root causes for the scores that we see is that we are still in the 3rd year of implementation, and our educators are still in the process of learning the system, as well as administering and monitoring the progress of students using the IRLA and the ENIL assessment. Next slide, please. For the focus area of academics, there's 3 components in here. There's 3 different goals, one for reading, one for math, and one for the UNIDOS program. The reading goal is by the June 2025. We're hoping that 70% of our students will meet the stretch goal for the iReady exam. We're hoping to unpack the iReady standards for reading in order to create groupings during X block to focus on the Tier 2 instructions. We're hoping to start the first groupings in June and then again change these groupings 3 times a year with the diagnostics exams. For math, we're also hoping the same. By the end of 2025, we're hoping that 70% of our students reach the stretch goal. And again, we're going to unpack the iReady standards for math, and we're hoping to focus in special groupings for Tier 2 interventions through our next block. And we're going to start similarly to the reading groupings. We'll start 1 in June and then have 3 different ones as the iReady diagnostics are taken. For our UNIDOS program, we are hoping to have 80% of our students show growth during the UNIDOS program, and also we're going to hoping to have 70% of our students reach the proficient or above in their IRLA and ANEAL assessments. In order to do this, the IRLA and ANEAL assessment provide us with power goals, so we're hoping that the teachers are able to share these power goals with our students. And use the IRLA and ANEAL to develop strategic groupings. And as well, we're hoping that our UNIDOS specialist is using the data to meet with the teachers in order to properly progress monitor our students in our UNIDOS program. Next slide, please. For the final focus area of SEL, we're going to focus on the SEL, well, in this case particularly, SEL is rooted in the Tier 1 interventions. This graph here shows that the students' dysregulations resulting in team responses has increased in the elementary to middle. Overall, we are progressing in the right direction. However, one can notice that the student dysregulation in the early grades is higher than in middle school. Next slide, please. Similarly to Aspen referrals, we're obviously trending in the right direction, but one also needs to note that there's more referrals in the kindergarten and obviously also in 7th and 8th grade. Next slide, please. There is a complexity to identify the root cause of our SEL needs at our school. I think if you start reading from the left to right, I think we need to notice that we have 754 students, we have 300 MLE students, and we went from 1.5 social worker to 1.0 social worker. Prior to this year, there hasn't been really a school-wide Tier 1 implementation for our school, and also a school-wide system with consistency addressing student behavior. As a result, our counselors and guidance educators are overloaded with Tier 2 and Tier 3 students and groupings and one-to-one instruction. So the proposal that we are having is, next slide please. The proposal that we have is to really, in order to reach the goal of by the end of next year, to decrease the student support team by 40%, we actually have to address Tier 1 interventions school-wide. So the 3 strategies that we have are school-wide strategies, starting with the PBIS school-wide. We'll start this summer with our PBIS team, and then we'll start going to implement PBIS next year. We're also going to have a school-wide implementation of morning meetings, emphasizing the district goal on restorative justice to really build student relationships. And finally, we're going to use the second step curriculum, which is driven through SEL, and those are going to be held once a week with our with our teachers as they're following the second step curriculum. And thank you. That's it. Thanks. Questions?
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I will now open it up to my colleagues for questions. I'll give everyone a minute to process. Mayor Valentine?
Thank you for the presentation. I will say I wasn't so quick to absorb everything in there, so I apologize if being redundant. Did you mention that there is one counselor? or did I miss something there? And to give a little background, one of my children spent 9 years at the East Somerville Community School, so I tried to pride myself in a lot of the supports that I've worked on while being an elected official. Which I saw were unequitable, so that one's really stuck out at me, so I think maybe I misunderstood.
Yes, we went down from 1.5 social workers to 1 social worker. We have 2 guidance educators and then 1 adjustment counselor. The two guidance educators, we have 1 that works with middle school and then 1 that works with elementary school. The cap suggested by DESE, it's 250. The cap of our guidance educators at around 300 students plus. Our social worker works with 754 students, and we have 1 adjustment counselor who works one-on-one with 54 students who receive, 42 students who receive special ed services. So.
Okay, I'm clear now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ackman?
Thank you. Through the chair, again, I too am sort of absorbing. I'm curious, it was the EL and the root causes, the ESL services for students. I'm curious through the chair, and this may go to the superintendent. Does this potentially open us up to civil rights violations? The lack of services going to our ELs?
We work in collaboration with Paulina Metropolis, who is in charge of the second language. I know that she's always keeping me abreast of where are the areas in which compliance is not being met. I know that we have a request for an increase on language support at the East, but we are fully aware of the needs there.
Ms. Patone?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for all this data. It's fantastic to see the level of detail that the team is diving into to assess and come up with, robust plans. I did have a question about Second Step. So the district has had licenses for Second Step. I think we've done some trainings in the past. It sounds like you're trying to revitalize it at the East. I know that sometimes we can wax and wane in terms of our implementation. I do want to make sure, I guess this is to the superintendent, that if this school is reinitiating in Second Step, that they have the appropriate level of training to make sure that if it hasn't been implemented as, what's the word I'm looking for, as comprehensively as it has maybe in the past, that maybe that is a good investment to refresh those teachers who did get the training and for those who haven't. So that's just a suggestion, because if we're going to do that, I'm not going to judge whether or not that's a great system, but meaning Second Step, but if we're going to do it, we'll do as well as we can.
Dr. Romano?
Through the chair, yeah, I know that through the budget collaborative process, Principal Ms. Diaz has requested some support around social emotional, and I know that our Director of Student Services, Liz Doncaster, has followed up with Berenice, with Ms. Principal Ms. Diaz. So as to the degree of how is that support happening, I think that that's a follow-up that we need to have in place. But I know that we are in a year 2 of the implementation plan around Second Step and our restorative justice programs. So I believe 25% of our administrators have been trained fully, and we're still in the early stages of the implementation across the board. So.
Ms. Patone? Ask a follow-up through you, Chair. Just to clarify, I know that we had used Second Step in the past. Obviously, we need to always be refreshing. But there was some work, like looking at evaluating Second Step, and I apologize, we may have discussed this in the past, and I just don't recall what came out of that. Thank you.
Dr. Boston Davis?
Thank you, through the chair, and thank you, Ms. Diaz, for this really thorough, thoughtful, data-driven presentation is excellent, so thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, to build off of this, so Liz Doncaster actually did a curriculum, through the curriculum review cycle, opened up last year for all educators to join a team. Well, it was open to all educators, and she, out of that, compiled a team of folks, both educators and administrators, to go through and evaluate social-emotional learning curriculums. Second Step was one of them, and we know that it was previously implemented and had some feedback. That was some adjusting feedback. So the goal there was to kind of reevaluate whether Second Step would be the curriculum to move forward with. After going through a process in which she looked at several curriculums, and I don't have the details, but I know a thorough process with this team, they actually ended up going back to Second Step last year through that curriculum review cycle. So this year she has an early adopters kind of plan for our district, and next year a full implementation, and also hoping to have some social-emotional learning stipended roles at each school, similar to how there are equity specialist stipended roles and wellness champion stipended roles at schools. So this is still in the planning phase, but they will help with things such as implementation for Second Step. So I do think that is definitely on Liz Doncaster's radar, and it is kind of a revitalization of the Second Step implementation.
Ms. Patel?
Thank you, through the chair, to whomever. I think I completely understand that sometimes there needs to be refreshing. There has to be retraining. We have new staff. I hope that something can be shared at some point in the future in terms of how we're going to have a strategy so it doesn't kind of go off, in terms of like a sustainable strategy in terms of making sure that this type of programming continues. And I don't know who, other than the principals who have a ton of accountability, is accountable to determine how we're implementing something like this with fidelity. So I don't know what the answer is, and I'm curious, like, I'm sure you might not have an answer right now, but at some point I think it'd be really valuable to the school committee and the community to really understand what are we going to do to systemically make sure that we sustain a program and not get into a position where it sounds like, the muscles aren't strong enough right now. And we understand that the curriculum rolls out new and all that other stuff, and it changes. So that's just a request at some point in the future to hear kind of the long-term strategy.
Did you want to respond?
Yes, I'm really excited about the scrutiny in terms of the outcomes of our systems of support, not only for the services that we're purchasing, and we're paying a lot of money for Second Step and restorative justice, but there are coaches that come along with it and other services that we're getting from different providers. One of the challenges that I am having at this point is to have some clear data around impact around those programs. So we are now basically having a data collection around numbers. What are the numbers of students that are being serviced? But as Dr. Boston Davis alluded to, there is a model that is trying to be, that is being proposed right now in terms of having SEL support at every building as a stipend. It's part of the budget collaborative process. It hasn't been budgeted, so the same that some of the requests that we have from Principal Mace Diaz. So we are in budget season, and we're going to have to really determine, based on our needs, based on our priorities, based on maximizing our outcomes, how do we distribute the monies, the limited monies that we have. So I definitely welcome the scrutiny, but I think at some point I'm going to have Liz Doncaster, our Director of Student Services, come here to share some information about the outcomes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Phillips?
I really appreciate the thoughtful focus on the root causes and trying to address them. I see a couple of goals are about the percentage of students, if I'm interpreting them right, the percentage of students increasing their proficiency level from like does not meet to partially meet. And I'm wondering, I didn't see it here, but I was probably just going too fast. Like, what is it right now? Like, for this past year, how many kids increased to, like, what percent of kids increased to proficiency?
For which category? Can you be more clear?
Well, so like the goal, if I'm understanding it correctly, the goal for equity and the goal for SEL is the same, right? And I think there's like 80% of kids by June 2025, at least 80% of our LTELs will increase their proficiency level. And I'm just wondering, like, what is it for 22, 23, or in the past? Do we know?
Yes, so for last year, we actually did not have any LTELs meet the criteria for succeeding, or I guess for passing the access score. We have 102 starting the school year, so 102 students did not meet the criteria for exiting access. So thinking about out of our total number of students, if you think in 80% of them, that would at least give us the 7th and 8th graders meeting the criteria for passing our access scores and exiting out of the ML services. So it was just a number that it seemed like a good number of students who have been in the program for over 5 years. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little bit of nuance to the limited our students who are not exiting the language proficiency needs? One of the challenges and I know that is really the right emphasis around making sure that our students develop their acquiring the language at a rate that is needed. It has an impact in middle school and has an impact in high school, and so it has a ripple effect across the board. So I think it's critical that we support our principals in that, not only the long-term MLs at the East, but all the long-term MLs. I mean, we have the largest population of MLs at the East, and so that's critical that we move that cohort of students to proficiency. And it has a significant impact across the board and when they go to high school, their access to other programs is limited because they need to get priority to the second language acquisition. I don't know if that enhanced that, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that there is also other complications around not making sure that the students are getting the resources they need to make sure that they exit that category.
Mr. Bichon?
Thank you, and through the chair, Principal Mace Diaz, pleased to meet you. And thank you, as my colleagues said, for all of this great data. This is tremendous. I'll plead ignorance, being totally new on this committee, and maybe for the benefit of those watching at home. I'm looking right now at slide 16 and 17 with the focus area on academics for ARC, which I think is the American Reading, is that curriculum?
Reading Company. American Reading Company.
Great.
Close.
Okay. So it looks like this is the 3rd year of the ARC implementation. Could you speak a little bit more about how that's been going? And it looks like you've identified, I guess, the newness of our adoption of that program in the district as being a root cause. I'm not sure I fully understand what our approach is to addressing that. If you could speak a little bit more about that.
Right, so ARC, so it's a new curriculum. So this is the 3rd-year rollout. So if you can notice, so for example, just pointing out the data, so 4th grade. So if you notice, the Spanish acquisition is 24%. It's the lowest out of all of them, right? That means that they recently, that's when they were in kindergarten, that we just started the program. And so changing the program and how the test, it's not just about testing the assessment and accuracy in Spanish and literacy in Spanish and English, but it's also how we're bridging from Spanish to English, and it's also how we are developing and learning phonics in Spanish and English. So it's a completely different curriculum, and it's a completely different way of actually approaching phonics and reading in Spanish and English. So it's not just a switch of a book, it is a completely different reading strategy, right? And so, for example, ARC believes in phonics that if you know how to read the word bat, then that means education, you know how to read the word cat. It is very different from our current foundations reading, where they're reading, they're selling this almost cat, right? And so it is, so I think the change in how it was taught has really certainly affected some of the students that have already been exposed to a previous curriculum, right? So if you notice, right, the kindergartners, as they're fresh, they're learning both languages, they're acquiring a much higher percent of reading in English and Spanish. As they're getting older, the curriculum, the acquisition, the learning acquisition is slightly different, as they are now being introduced to different types of learning. So it's slightly different. So it's not just, it's a process. We have to kind of like let the process go. We're hoping that as we continue to push ARC through our elementary and middle, that we're going to be able to really track a better system of Spanish acquisition and English acquisition through the ARC. But our students are performing much better. They seeming to be adapting and making the bridging much faster at younger grades, which is what we want. You're welcome.
And perhaps I missed this, but why did we go from 1.2 social workers to 1 social worker?
I am not aware of the answer.
Do we know when or how that happened?
I cannot elaborate on that. So
I'm not sure.
Was it?
That's how I started this year.
So this,
yes, it was this year.
This whole year you've had one, and the previous year.
So that was prior at the beginning of the school year. Is that right?
That was July 1st.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think is in terms of the distribution of the the folks who support the social emotional services, in terms of the guidance counselors and the other distribution, I don't know how that compares to the other schools, but my understanding is that basically it was a numbers game in terms of assigning the number of social emotional supports.
Ms. Pachon?
Through your chair, Corruption, as a follow-up to that, I mean, it would be, I'm sure this is something that is going to be in your thought processes, what has been the impact in the change? So we're hearing from the principal that having 1 social worker, she's hearing from her team that that has had a negative impact, but I'd be really curious, and I'm sure this will be part of the budget collaborative, to see what the data says in terms of, are we having better or worse outcomes because we have less social worker support either at this school or another school. So I look forward to hearing more about that, if that's possible.
Mayor Valentine?
Thank you. And the other thing I'd be interested in is, and I plead ignorance on sort of the structure, is adjustment counselors. So, which, if I go back to the slide, but which professions do what? Was there an adjustment made? Are there more adjustment counselors at the East because of its size and so forth? Is that the ratio where we want to go? So I would just be interested going forward in understanding that.
Yeah, our adjustment counselors only work with students that have counseling and their IEPs. So the 2 adjustment counselors there only work with students with disabilities, whereas our social worker works with our 754 students.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or concerns? Mr. Bichon?
This isn't as much a question as just a comment to say I appreciate the straightforward way in which you identified for instance, 0% of MLE students exceeding expectations for various measures, or students with disabilities. That's an inequity that, I think myself and my colleagues see as strikingly important, and it came through, so just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. As an immigrant myself, it's a data point that really strikes to my heart. Yeah.
And on that note, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Just one quick note I wanted to highlight. I know this is Our principal, Mace Diaz, first year, she has the largest school that we have, K through 8. She also happens to be bilingual and is a very passionate educator that is always advocating for the right things for her students. So, I'm really proud and honored to have her in our community. So, thank you. And now next we have Mr. Principal Pelletier, and he is going to be sharing his data.
Thank you, Ruben. I have some fans back here that I just wanted to say hi to. So Lisa, Brenda, Kim, and Leanne are here. They're members of our school improvement committee, so they're happy to sit back there. They're not going to come up here. And then also Leanne brought her son, which is a real commitment. He's getting McDonald's after this, so thanks, Aiden. And I wanted to just say that I'm really excited to join Barron East tonight because my kids go to East, so Colin and Levi are there, and so that's a really important school to us personally, so it was great to share this with her. And then lastly, another reason I'm excited is the last district where I did this, the room was much smaller and the camera behind was much lower, so it got my bald spot, but I don't think Glenda was on the phone and she confirmed that that's not going to happen tonight, so I'm excited about that. But without further ado, I just wanted to get into our plan. So we can move forward to the next slide, please, Erica, thank you. So I wanted to throw this up here. Here's the school mission. It took a little bit of digging to find this. This is a really old mission that's been sort of around for a while, and I didn't collect any data around what percentage of our staff were familiar with it, but it'd be a pretty low number. But I wanted to throw it up here because while it is old and sort of unfamiliar to people, I think some of the themes that I put in bold up here are still really resonant to people and live in the work that we do every day. So one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is revisiting this year, or in the next 2 years as part of this plan, but I want to make sure we remind ourselves that there's a lot of great stuff in here. It's more about refamiliarizing ourselves with it and kind of making it our own moving forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to give you a really quick, just sort of like who we are, where we are, and what matters to us. So I think it's important to point out sort of where we are in Somerville. We're basically equidistant between Tufts and two of the larger housing developments in Somerville, and I think that's important to just be upfront about because it means we have families that come to us from single-family homes over by Tufts, and we have families that come to us from Clarendon Hill Apartments and Towers. And so the only thing I think that's worth pointing out for is that we have a very culturally diverse community of learners in front of us. And so that's something that, we have to pay attention to and we have to be mindful of, and it's something that we're going to be working on with a lot of the steps that we are going to put in place. Next slide, please. So there's a little bit of the breakdown in terms of who we are. Racially, student race and ethnicity, it looks a little less diverse when you map it that way, but then in terms of the selected populations, and this just comes from DESE's information and data, you can see that there's it's an important mix and something that we're making sure that we're aware of in the classroom. It matters to know where our kids come from and what their cultures are and all that. Next slide, please. A couple other important things. I think it's really important, and I think this speaks to sort of one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be at West. Where we learn. Our building is one hallway, 3 floors, and so there's a lot of opportunity both for kids to mingle with each other and mix with each other. It also means that it's really possible for all the adults in the building to know all the kids in the building, and that's one of the things we're going to speak to tonight. And that's not to say that that doesn't present some challenges, but I think there's lots of opportunity there in terms of just navigating the space that we can really take advantage of. And then next slide. The last thing about our school that I wanted to point out before jumping into the plan is sort of what we believe in. It didn't take long when I started at West in the summer to find out that all the adults really care about the kids. And I don't say that as like a, pie in the sky, like that happens at every school. Of course it does. But I think in terms of what you notice in the processes and some of the things that have been implemented in terms of protocols protocols in the building, it really does speak to a belief in that knowing all students really matters. And so a couple of the images that are up here are our No Slur Pledge, which is recited every morning. The spreadsheet has fake names on it. They're not real names, so they're not kids. But that's an example of our student success planning document, which is, we're trying to do a better job of keeping it up to date, but the idea there was that we can keep track of the things that we are learning about kids in positive ways that are impacting their experience in positive ways and pass that information along in a seamless way. And then I think one of the most interesting things is that bottom picture, which is our Knowing All Students process, which was started a couple years ago. So at the beginning of the year, we go through and we put little stickers on every student that the adults feel like they have a connection with. And so that's it's been a really valuable process for us. So one of the things that we're building on, and we'll dive into it a little bit more, is that that's the adults' perception of those relationships, but it's obviously not the kids' perception. And so one of the things we've launched this year is hearing all students in terms of like asking them these questions so that we can kind of triangulate that data a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so jumping into the plan. I watched some of Felix's plan last week. I could not watch all of it. It was long. But one of the things that Dr. Phillips mentioned was that oftentimes these plans kind of get put on a shelf and we're not sure how relevant or how well they are kind of tracked and updated and things. And so one of the things that we really wanted to keep in mind when we were drafting this plan is that we wanted to keep it in line with some of the things that we're already really focused on and some of the things that we really believe in at West. And so we wanted to make sure that it really, followed that theme of knowing all students matters, that built on that. And also we wanted to focus on things that everybody in the building, that all the adults in the building could work on. Sorry. A reminder. And so those are things that just frame the plan so we can move forward. Next slide, please. And so really quickly, before we dive in, the three kind of focus areas that we decided to frame our goals with are in the area of academic areas. We wanted to focus on student discourse and how to lift that in our classrooms, in all of our classrooms, whether it's a PE classroom or a ELL classroom or a pre-K classroom. An equity goal is centered on those connections to adults that I mentioned earlier, that hearing all students piece. And then our SEL goal is focused on, similar to what Berenice was talking about, that SEL skill development. There's some really interesting data from our conditions for learning that we'll dive into that kind of shines an interesting light on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the way I framed this presentation was that I went from data to possible reasons to what the goal is to how we're working on it. So that's kind of like the framework. So for this, I wanted to quickly show some MCAS data that just aims to highlight the difference that we're noticing between learners with disabilities and all our learners. And you can see there's quite a big difference in terms of how many of those learners with disabilities are meeting or exceeding the expectations. And the reason we wanted to highlight that is because since our focus is on student discourse, we think that the way oftentimes those learners are, the way the interventions are kind of established for those learners is in small groups or pull-out type of experiences that don't necessarily engage them in collaborative learning environments. And so one of our hypotheses is that if we can do that more for everybody, it'll lift that. Piece of our community as well. Next slide, please. And this kind of hints at that as well. So we thought that it'd also be interesting to dive into the pieces of the MCAS, and granted the MCAS is one piece of data and there are many other pieces that we want to look at, but the essays that kids are writing on those tests are sort of the one area where we can sort of make that connection to this is an area where people have to plan for it, they have to critically think about it, they have to build a response. And so in those experiences, and I just chose grades 3 and grade 6, but it was very consistent across all the grades that the learners with disabilities are scoring much lower, and those scores are reported in a very strange way. It's just the total % of available points that your school is getting, but still it's a very stark difference. So next slide, please. And then I wanted to combine some conditions for learning data as well. This is simply about how interesting and sort of engaging kids are feeling their experience are, which I think ties into that idea of if they're talking to each other, they're a little more engaged. So you can see there's quite a bit of growth to be had there. Next slide, please. This one is also about the voice piece, which came up earlier as well. And in my notes here, I highlighted the how I learn, because obviously there are some constraints around sort of what students are learning and how their voice plays into that. But in terms of this discourse focus, we think that how students are learning, giving them more opportunities to lean into that and have some say over that will have an impact as well. Next slide, please. And so just a real quick summary of some of the potential root causes. We think that one of the things that's at play here is that since COVID, a lot of our instructional practices have been framed by slides or a screen that is kind of like the main focus in classrooms. And so as we move further away from COVID, sort of. We also think that we're moving further away from that instructional practice, so that's one piece. The size of our school, and this came up with our team because as kids get older, they get very used to the kids at our school. It's a small school, so they know each other very, very well. So there was a piece of hypothesis that was like, in 8th grade, they may be sick of each other, and they may not want to talk to each other as much in classrooms. So that was one piece. And then I think a big one for me is this third one, which is I do think we tend to focus more on the kind of quote-unquote academic pieces of kids' experiences than some other pieces. And so that's a shift that we want to facilitate as well with this plan. Next slide, please. Excuse me. And so with that, so the goal here is a pretty big one. We want to, and we've started working on this already, but we want to develop a school-based kind of framework for what discourse means and what it can look like in classrooms. And that framework will also help us figure out what are the strategies and the approaches that we can leverage in our classrooms to lift that. And one of the most important things about this that I have underlined here is that we really need to be able to measure student discourse in order to lean into this goal, and that's a tricky thing to do, but having that framework and developing that shared understanding will help us do that. Next slide, please. And here are some of the things that are leading us in that direction. So the green is stuff that we've already started, and the orange is stuff that's sort of on the horizon. We've already done some building-based PD this year with some of the coaches, the district coaches, Griselda George and Matt Birch, who gave us a really nice framework for how to set the stage for student discourse. So we're going to use that to build that bigger framework that we talked about. Another thing that I think is exciting and has a lot of potential in terms of leverage is that learning from each other bullet point on the right-hand side. We're trying to really make sure that we're finding ways to get teachers into each other's classrooms to learn from the practices that are surrounding them in the building. And so we're lucky to have a couple building subs who have been really consistent, and on days when they're not in a classroom assigned, which is not very often, but on those days we're able to offer up those opportunities to go visit and observe each other, which has been great. And so, okay, move forward, thank you. So the next one's a little more simple. It's that idea of connecting more kids to adults. And this is kind of a carryover from the plan, the existing plan that was in place last year. The idea here is just that we want to connect kids to adults. So this is data about how kids are enjoying school. So it looks like everything's really great. Lots of kids are enjoying school. Next slide, please. But then when you ask, is there an adult in my school that I feel comfortable sharing my problems with, I think that having almost 30% of your kids answer not really or no is not great. And I think that's a reasonable thing to focus on and a really important thing to focus on. Next slide, please. So again, some sort of a hypotheses for why that might happen. I think one of the biggest ones on here for me is that when we tend to think about focusing or supporting kids in terms of their relationships, their social emotional experience at school, a lot of that falls on a counseling staff or somebody that's outside of the classroom. And so the adult connections that kids are leaning into for that support are not readily available in their classroom. They're sort of external. And so because of that dynamic, I think we lose out on building connections inside the classroom that are more privy to the minute-to-minute, day-to-day experience. And then I also think this ties in, again, addressing Dr. Phillips' point from last week, I do think this ties into instructional strategies. The more we can engage kids in discourse-based experiences, I think that's also going to help in terms of their relationships with the adults in the building. Next slide, please. So pretty blunt, the goal for this plan is to get 100% of students to either agree or strongly agree with that question that there is an adult in my school that I feel comfortable sharing my problems with. Next slide, please. And there's some pretty cool work that we've started. Again, that knowing all students process with putting stickers on the kids that we have connections with. But this year, we just launched in January. We had all of the teachers, all of the grade levels develop their own sort of grade-specific version of like a survey that they would give to kids to find out who the kids are connecting with. So even in pre-K, they did it. They did it as a sort of one-on-one, very time-intensive process. And I think it was awesome. The challenge, though, is that it gave lots of different types of data depending on the surveys, because the pre-K surveys looked very different than the grade 8 surveys. So one of the things that came out of our analysis of that first iteration of it was that we want to sort of hone it so that it's a little more similar across grades, so that the data that we get from it is a little more relevant across the school. But it's been a really great practice for those grade-specific teams because they've been able to identify things that they can do already. So we're going to hone that practice. And another piece that I think is worth pointing out is the bullet on the building-based systems side on the bottom is exploring some outside organizations to support this work as well. So we don't necessarily need kids to be connecting with adults in our building, but if we have external organizations, like I've already started talking to BAM and WOW and Big Brothers Big Sisters, who has a connection to Tufts Athletics as well. So there are lots of other opportunities to connect kids with adults as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so SEL, last goal. So this is interesting. So this is a slide from our Conditions for Learning that asks essentially like the adults in our community, how do we do at giving kids social emotional skills? And everybody thinks we do an awesome job. Next slide, please. But then when we ask how are kids using those skills, it's a really big difference. And so across the board, whether you're a kid, a family member, or a staff member, you're sort of saying that, well, not terribly well, not as well as we thought. And so to us, that was a big sort of difference that we wanted to dive into and dig into a little bit. How are we feeling so good about the work that we're sort of giving kids, or the experience we're giving kids in terms of SEL, but it's not sort of, they're not using that, leaning into it independently. So that's what we're going to target. Next slide, please. And so, again, some consistency across the different focus areas. We do think that one of the reasons this might be the case is that we focus a lot on academic success and don't honor or celebrate other types of success or other types of positive experiences. So we've started to do that this year a little bit more with how we're celebrating students on a monthly basis. But it will actually tie into rethinking our mission statement and what our core values are as a school so that we can celebrate those on a regular basis. And then I think it's interesting to go right after Berenice because I think we experienced some similar things in terms of what the SEL practices are across the building. They're not consistent. Some people are more comfortable than others with circle practices. Some people are leaning into second step more than others. And so a big part of this work is going to be to bring some consistency to the building and some shared understanding of what that looks like. Next slide, please. And so this goal is a pretty big one, but one of our goals is to develop a school-wide set of core values, so rethinking that mission statement that can frame a social-emotional kind of approach. So we have some sort of PBIS type of thing that statement or one of the things that Brenda brought to our attention was the high litter habits that exist at the high school. So something like that is something that we want to develop and hone in on as a community at West. And we think that if we do that, we can get 80% of our students to say usually or always that they can stay calm and manage their emotions on that response. Next slide, please. Please, excuse me. And again, in terms of the staff capacity and the building-based systems that sort of will lead us there, the green is what we've already started, the orange is on the horizon. So we have already started trying to build a more cohesive understanding of how circle practices can impact the kids' experiences. So every class has a morning meeting block at the beginning of the day, but we're trying to, again, get teachers into each other's classrooms so they can see what that looks like and learn from each other in that respect. We're also modeling that in all of our PD, school-wide PD that we have. Our ILT is leading circles in those, and so that we're modeling it there as well. And then I think one of the important ones on the right-hand side in terms of systems is exploring the whole school SEL programs. So second step, we have 1 or 2 teachers that have sort of leaned into that pretty heavily, but I think we can lean into that more consistently and see if that has an impact, again, to the questions that came up earlier around what is the impact of that curriculum. I think we need to be consistent with it to know. And then also one possibility is exploring a responsive classroom, which I know our Genziano has leaned into as well, so I've been talking to Glenda about that as well. And I think that's the last one. I didn't have a question slide, so I don't think you can ask any questions.
Thank you for that great presentation. I will now open it up to my colleagues for questions. While everyone is mulling it over, I will ask mine, which is a twofold question. I really liked your idea of the pictures of students where it looks like you had the staff literally, putting stickers. So the twofold question is, what happens if you see that what do you do if you see one student has no stickers?
Great question. Yeah, so we did that in August. I think the first time the school did it was last year. Is that right? But this August we did it again. And what happens that we did it during the August PD days, and so we were in the library and we do it, and we take note of all the classroom teachers. It's all organized by the next, like this year's class, and so they're able to take notes of who doesn't have any, and make a plan about how we can connect that kid to somebody else, or just kind of make note of that. We did revisit it in January, so we brought all that back out in January when we came back on the 2nd to just kind of look at it and see if it was surprising to anybody after having like half of the year through with. And it was. I think there was a lot of takeaways about that. But one of the things we want to work on is how to not just do that once or twice a year, but how do we make that like an impactful and informative piece of our experience. So I think it's a really innovative thing to do. But to your point, I think we can be better about like what the next steps are that are connected to it.
And then the follow-up question, and this is just an idea that occurred to me that might not work, but I'm just wondering if you could do the reverse with pictures of adults and have the students put stickers of who they feel connected to.
Yeah, so that's what the Hearing All Students surveys were. They look different for different grades, but like for 8th grade, we did it on a Google Doc, and so the 8th graders theoretically would know enough adults in the building that they could again, theoretically
Got it. So
name
that's essentially
somebody.
what those surveys
Yeah, exactly. So
Great.
some of the surveys for K to 2 were actually picture surveys. So they had pictures of all the staff members, and kids would make a mark of who they knew.
Great, thank you. Questions from my colleagues? Yes, Dr. Phillips?
Thanks, through you, Chair. First of all, I just realized, and I apologize, we made all of our newest principals go first this year, and I just want to thank you all for your vulnerability and for doing that. That's huge. On the West SIP plan, I really appreciate your focus on vision and getting everyone aligned on like where you want to go. That seems to make a lot of sense to me, given kind of what you've talked about. The one thing I wanted to offer is, if you're not yet aware of it, the PERTS surveys out of Stanford ask a lot of the same questions you want to move the needle on, and they're designed to be given by teachers in their classrooms on like a 6-week or 8-week basis. It's like very short survey. You do it, you get a report, and I believe it's free, so you might be interested in it.
PERTS, it's called?
PERTS.
Okay.
Out of
There's also
Stanford.
one, Lisa, what's the one in Harvard? Making Caring Common. There's also, we were thinking about that one too. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Barish?
Thank you. Through you, thank you for this presentation, for the data and all the ideas. I'm just curious, and not to be nitpicky, but you mentioned in one of the slides that the options for communicating with teachers are limited.
yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I wasn't sure I fully understood.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about was, again, as in sort of our root cause conversation around the that gap in about 30% of kids that aren't connecting with adults. We still, after our first iteration of the Hearing All Students surveys in January, we still had about 20% of 7th and 8th graders, who are the kids that have been there the longest and sort of know, quote unquote, know the most adults in the building, that didn't identify anybody that they felt like they could reach out to. So one of the things that we thought about is the way that older kids are communicating a lot these days is not in person. And so one of the things I think it's worth us exploring is, are there other ways that we can offer, particularly older students who have Chromebooks, like is there a form they can fill out if they feel like they need to connect with somebody? Or if they do have somebody that they feel comfortable with, is there a shared Google Doc or something like that? And so it doesn't have to lean on a face-to-face conversation, which in a middle school setting is tricky just logistically, but also sort of socially, dynamically a little tricky as well. So that's the type of thing that I was hinting at in that.
Thank you.
Dr. Abbott?
Thank you. Thank you for obvious amount of work that you've put into this. I'm curious about that goal of sort of adjusting the core values and, you know, you're clear about the input and sort of clear about the goal of the output. I'm curious your vision for how you get from one to the other.
Me too. And so I've, I think there's a couple options. I think that we can do it sort of in-house, for lack of a better term. I think there, you know, that. I think we can definitely have this conversation and do it as a staff, but I also know that, for example, Next Wave Full Circle recently has gone through an envisioning process, so I am reaching out to Margaret about what that looked like and how that, I think I'd lean into, although there's some other variables involved in going down this road, having like an external organization help us through that process, because I just think that would sort of remove it from an internal, sort of, I don't know, that's what I would lean towards, but again, that relies on potentially like securing grants or something, funding type of stuff. But at my last school that I worked at, which I wasn't there long enough because I came here to like see it through, but we started, in my second year, we started doing it just as an internal process. So we talked to staff, to students, and to families about what are the priorities for you, for your kids here at school, and started very vague like that and sort of narrowed it down to a list of 5 or 6 kind of core values. So there's always that, but I think it would be interesting to hear from Margaret about how that process worked for her at Next Wave.
Mr. Beacham?
Thank you, through you, Chair. One thing I really appreciated about your academic goal is that it's also an equity goal. In particular, looking at the discrepancy between the points earned by all learners versus those learners with disabilities. So I really appreciate the focus on that. And this particular focus about discourse is one that, we talk about in our family a lot. So this really resonated with me. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about what the theory of action is in addressing student discourse to help close that achievement gap?
Yeah, I think that the way we're thinking about it is, and actually Lisa asked this question about our plan as a piece of feedback that I think is really important. When we talk about student discourse, we're not simply talking about getting kids to turn and talk to each other, period. The idea here is that we want to focus more on, math as an example. In the frameworks for Massachusetts, there are the sort of content pieces of the math frameworks, and then there are the practice standards. And the practice standards are all about thinking critically, about modeling, about making sense of problems, about those types of things. And I think those are the types of habits and the types of mindsets that we want to lift, and we want to give all kids an opportunity to talk about those and to think about those in their classroom experience. And that's why I included that slide about the difference between again, it's MCAS and it's one data point, but I think it highlights that oftentimes when we're noticing that kids have gaps in certain areas, we address those gaps with very skill-based, intensive interventions, which is important, but also that sometimes pulls away from the more holistic, critical thinking opportunities to learn from each other and to bounce ideas off of each other. So we think that by focusing on that, it's not immediately going to impact that, but I think it creates an environment where that is valued by everybody and that where we're prioritizing it. I think the challenge is in that's a tougher thing to measure, and so when things are tougher to measure, they don't often get prioritized, and so we want to figure out how to do that.
Great. Seeing no further questions or comments, we will thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there more to your report?
That concludes the report.
All right, that brings us to report of subcommittees. We have one report to approve. I will entertain a motion.
I move to accept the report of the Rules Management Subcommittee from February 26th of 2024.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Barish, seconded by Mr. Bitone. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to unfinished business. We have an MSBA update. Dr. Carmona?
Yes, so the conversation that we had last time we were here was around a decision to determine what was the role that we want our chair in the compliance certification, and we decided no, I think in collaboration with the chair, we talked about making sure that we have a vote in regards to that role that the chair has in the compliance certification. So today I believe you have a you have a role in that process, so that's in regards to that vote that was left, or that conversation. We've shared this document with you last time. I know it's a lengthy document. It was a nine-page document, so we provided time for you to look at it, and then today we will have a vote around that certificate of compliance, compliance certificate. As far as the other pieces of information around the MSBA process, I think there's just one. We will be sharing with the community a document. I think the city is going to be generating a document to ask for the participation in the school building committee. So that is a document that will be going out on Wednesday, and so in that document we will be basically asking the community to engage in the MSBA process. So that will be coming out on Wednesday. But the most immediate thing in terms of the MSBA process is the certificate of compliance that is in front of you today for a vote.
So I will open it up to questions, and/or there is a motion on the agenda to authorize me to sign the certificate of compliance. Dr. Phillips?
Thanks, through you, Chair. I think this is really to Mayor Ballantyne. But we're going to vote to approve a certificate of compliance about a ton of details that I don't know very much about. And I guess I'm wondering, Mayor, if there's anything in here that you're particularly worried about us staying in compliance with.
We haven't started, so the compliance can't happen. As I understand this document, it says we're going to stay in compliance of.
Right, and my question is there anything that we're saying we're going to stay in compliance of that you're worried about us not staying in compliance of?
No.
And I believe our lawyers have also reviewed this. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. So this document, and basically it states that we understand that we have to, basically the MSBA process is a process that is vetted, that we depend on the funding for the final decision, that is a set of like 29 items in terms of our overall understanding and basically agreement that the process is very explicit at every stage of the process. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Barish?
Yeah, I think it's more of a reflection than a question, really, but I think number 15 in this document which talks about ensuring or certifying that we haven't removed from service any schoolhouse operated by the district, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that that's something that hadn't occurred to me as being an issue in the past. And, you know, we've talked about the 1895 building, we've talked about the Cummings School, we've talked about, I mean, as we talk about what we're going to do with the Winter Hill School, what we're going to do with the Brown School, you know, just, I'm glad to have read this document because it makes that process even more important, I guess, in my mind, that if we do remove a building from the district, essentially, that could impact future projects. So I just wanted to shine a little light on that.
So it mentioned in the last 10 years. So in the past, this is new to me. I will say the law office has looked through it. It's, you know, nobody has expressed any concern about, you know, the whole document, and we're in the process of having complied with the high school all the pieces before. I just wasn't quite clear because it said in the last 10 years what you were referring to. The last 10.
I'm thinking prospectively that 6 years from now, if we were to apply for another MSBA grant, if we have removed a schoolhouse from the district, it could impact that process. So I'm just saying I'm glad to have read this because there are things in this that would not have occurred to me as we're looking forward to whatever the next building we might rebuild is. So I'm not saying that it's a problem with this MSBA process, I'm just glad that we have this before us and that I have read it.
I'm trying to project, if I may, Madam Chair, I'm trying to project a little bit. The Powder House School fell within that 10-year, but I don't believe it was when the school closed down. You know, it was actually when I try to think of the years, because it was if we started the MSBA process around, actually, I'm not, the override was voted on in 2016, so the MSBA process was at around 2014. The school was closed maybe within that 10-year period, but it was a non-functioning school. I imagine they're talking about whether you have an operational school building, but I'll ask on that point. Thank you.
Mr. Buteau?
I think I'll say the quiet part loud here, which I think Member Barish is getting at, which is if we make a decision to close the Brown School and consolidate the Brown and the Winter Hill into one school building, that could potentially, if in the future we apply for MSBA funding, that this clause 15, the MSBA could look at that and say, well, you're not in compliance with this for some future building project. You're looking at me like like I'm crazy, but I think that may be what I'm reading here.
Did you want to respond, Mayor?
Yeah, I'll clarify with our lawyers, but you all clarified. I'm not, we have the Cummings. We held on to the Edgerly. I'm thinking about, we have the Winter Hill. We have this, but anyways, I don't read it the way you're interpreting it, but I can double check.
Dr. Phillips, do you want to respond? Or ask a question?
I'm sure our lawyers will give the actual answer, but the MSBA invited us to include the Brown in our solution, so if we do that and then we close the Brown, I do not think that this section would apply.
Are there any other questions or comments? And if not, I will entertain a motion. Dr. Ack?
I move to authorize the chair to sign the Massachusetts School Building Authority form. What's it called? Really long form. Initial compliance certification with the ICC. The ICC for the City of Somerville Winter Hill Community School, MSBA project number 2023027400120.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Patone. Is there any further discussion? Dr. Phillips.
Sorry, this is totally dumb, but this motion is written like it sounds like MSBA speak, and I wonder if we have to say it verbatim for it to be legal, just like we did before.
It was actually a motion that came from our lawyer. I'm not sure how much the MSB cares, but to your point, perhaps we could use the exact language for posterity.
Yeah, it's,
I motion that the chair of the school committee for the Somerville Public Schools, which is currently Ms. Lilana Krepshin, is hereby appointed and authorized on behalf of the district to execute and deliver on behalf of the district the initial compliance certificate and any amendments thereto, the agreement as required by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, in connection with a project for construction of repairs and renovations or new construction for the Winter Hill Community Innovation School, and to thereby bind the district to the terms and conditions of such agreement.
Second.
All right. I have a very lawyerly motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Patone. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Is there anything more to our MSBA update, or does that cover it for now?
that covers it. Yep.
All right, that brings us to new business. I will entertain a motion for some field trips. Dr. Ackman.
I move to approve on March 22nd, 11 Somerville High School students from Carpentry will visit the Rhode Island Civic Center and travel via school van at no cost to students on April 5th to April 6th. 71 students from the high school will travel to New York City for a 2-day music tour. Travel via coach bus costs $649 per student. April 3rd through 6th, 20 Somerville High School students from the robotics team will travel to Springfield, Massachusetts to participate in the Big E robotics competition. Travel via high school or Somerville Public School van at no cost to students. And on June 5th through June 7th, 70 students from grades 5 and 6 from the Healy will travel to visit Nature's Classroom in Groton, Mass. Travel via bus costs $366 per student.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Patone. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bitone.
I just want to thank the educators for bringing these tremendous opportunities to our students and the families for entrusting their students to participate in these fantastic opportunities. I'm really excited. Thank you.
Agreed. Ms. Patone?
Through the chair, I just had a question. I know that about the high school students going to New York for the music tour. I know there was some fundraising done. We were always asked the question about who was included, who wasn't included, because obviously it's a very high cost for students. So if there can be some follow-up or report out to make sure that we have been as inclusive as possible, that would be great.
I'm getting nods, so yes, we will do that. All right, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to a school diploma request. Ms. Parrish.
I move to approve Somerville High School diplomas for Tiras Gebru of Somerville, Massachusetts, and Isha Vashisht of Somerville, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I have a motion by Ms. Parrish, seconded by Dr. Phillips. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, sorry, Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. Through the chair, I was wondering if it's possible for future, like on the agenda or somehow for future diploma requests to get phonetic spelling of names. That way, for those of us reading it, it will, we can be confident in these people we are proudly congratulating.
That is a wonderful suggestion.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations to our 2 new graduates. And that brings us to acceptance of grant funds. I will entertain a motion.
I I move to accept all federal entitlement and continuation grants and all state continuation grants awarded to the Somerville Public Schools, including a federal grant, FCC 22 Perkins Equipment and Program Improvement for $13,850. And a private grant from the Whole Kids Foundation, and then $3,000 for updating and renovating the garden space at the West Somerville Neighborhood School.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Dr. Phillips. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to items from committee members. Ms. Patone.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to announce that on Saturday, March 16th, from noon to 2, I will be part of an office hours with Senator Jalen, Representative Uiterhoven, and City Councilor Naima Site to open that up to the community if anybody wants to participate on Saturday, the 16th at Forge Cafe in Somerville on Somerville Ave.
Great.
Noon to 2.
Great. Mr. Bitton?
That's a great reminder to me that I also have office hours coming up, Ward 7 office hours at Yago Coffee on Broadway with Senator Jalen, Rep. Barber, and Councilor Pineda Neufeld. So 10 a.m. to noon at Yago.
What date?
Oh, on Saturday, March 9th. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thank
Are
you.
there any other items from committee members? All right, seeing none, do we have any condolences this evening? All right, with that, we are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.